I'm a photographer. My name is Andrew Zimmermann, and I'm from Arlington, Virginia. I work with an old large format camera, which if you've seen old movies or sometimes old cartoons, it's the camera where the guy has the cloth over their head, and it's got this big sort of accordion-like thing in the middle of it. It's called a bellows. And that camera makes negatives that are 8 by 10 inches, so that's about 40 times larger than your traditional old 35 millimeter roll film. And the reason I use that is because it is extremely sharp and it has an extremely clear picture. And also I just really like the old process of walking around with this huge clunky thing. It weighs about 40 pounds with the tripod. And it just really forces you to slow down and look at the things you're photographing rather than just shooting at a high rate and then sort of later going back to edit them, but without having really paid attention to the place you were in to begin with. And a lot of my work sort of deals with landscape in general, usually sort of centered around the idea of landscapes that people overlook for one reason or another. For instance, a project I did a couple of years ago was in the Colorado Rockies, and instead of focusing on giant mountain peaks and broad vistas, I worked on sort of smaller landscapes, like little creeks or little areas of nature that I felt were not sort of the traditional cliched view of a place, but sort of a broader view of it, but that still encapsulated that place, that were still specific to that place, without being what had been seen before. And then my most recent body of work that I've completed is actually a series of photographs from my suburban home, around my suburban home in Arlington, Virginia, a sort of a landscape and architecture of this neighborhood that most people would sort of consider too banal to pay attention to, just the sort of place you pass through without really noticing it. But I grew up there, and I've always found it sort of very beautiful. I mean, it's very lush, and the way the very simple houses and the trees, both native plants and things that have been cultivated, all kind of fused together. I've always found that really fascinating. So that's another example of sort of landscape that is not commonly noticed.
I understand that your current project, I actually seen you work just across the street, like it was like here last week. Mm-hmm. Or sometime here recently, but I seen you had your big camera set up and you were taking a picture of the church. Your current project is you're taking pictures of like all of the churches here in Nebraska City.
Yeah, I'm doing every church in Nebraska City, every place with a Nebraska City address. I think I've got them all on a list. So that includes all of the many churches that are sort of downtown, and then others that are relatively far afield, like St. Joseph's, which is sort of out in the country, but which, for whatever reason, still has a Nebraska City address. So, there's about 23 different churches. And, I've been going around to all of them. I'm actually getting pretty close to being done. I only have a few left to do the interior shots of. The exteriors, I've basically done them all already. Yeah, so that's my current project. Yeah, I guess when I got here at Nebraska City, I knew I wanted to do something to sort of capture the spirit of the town. I mean, I'd never been here before, so I didn't immediately know what that was, but I spent my first, 4 or 5 days here just walking around. Probably walked about 20 miles a day, just like looking around and seeing the town at like a foot pace, not driving, but just like walking and taking the time to look. And after a bit, I sort of realized that there were a lot of churches here, but still sort of a manageable number that, could be like taken as a whole group and used to sort of serve as a microcosm of the town. Because, the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that church life seems like one of the centers of public life here. There's, I think a lot of people here go to church, and there's a whole variety of different denominations. There's Catholics, Lutherans, Seventh-day Adventists, Baptists, everything. You got, a huge number of different denominations here. And then the buildings themselves are built in a really interesting variety of different architectural styles. You have sort of somewhat older, more, I guess you could say, traditionally viewed as beautiful or picturesque, like St. Benedict's. And then you have, buildings that are maybe a little more like sort of simple, or maybe you could say humble, like Church of Christ, which I think is an old schoolhouse. So yeah, I was just really fascinated by all of these different churches that are all, sort of to serve the same purpose, but in such a wide variety of styles.
Are you like a religious individual at all? Or is this just kind of something, like you said, with like a the spiritual connection to the town and like architectural connection with the buildings?
Well, I mean, I grew up going to a congregational church, but I haven't gone for quite some time. I mean, I don't quite think of myself as a person who's involved in organized religion, but I have a lot of sympathy and respect for people who are. Like, in a sense, I'm not quite a good Christian, but I guess I would say I largely live a Christian lifestyle. And, a lot of my close friends are Catholics. Somehow that happened. I mean, I don't know why them in particular, but that just, I've always had the greatest respect for that lifestyle. But as for the project, it was less about me per se than just about what I found coming here. So it wasn't so much a question of like, I want to express this particular thing about myself so much as I came to a place, started to sort of get a feeling about it, like what it was about. And I wanted to capture that by focusing on some sub-subject within the town. Like, I could have taken, a million photographs of every building in the town or, you could go on forever. Even in a town a tenth the size of this one, you could just photograph for years and you never really completely capture it. So yeah, I really wanted to just find something that I thought served as like a smaller version of the town as a whole. To me, I thought that the churches were the sort of single subject that captured that best. And just visually speaking, yeah, I was really drawn to the variety of different architectural styles that all the churches were built in. Some were built to be churches. Others were converted from other things. Like I think I was talking to somebody at Seventh-day Adventist, and they said that it used to be a dentist's office or something like that. Yeah, and like I said, the Church of Christ over on 10th and 10th, I guess used to be a schoolhouse. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting, just the idea of people building their congregations into different kinds of spaces. And to a certain degree, you can kind of see that some of that architectural difference reflects a difference in spirit of the church. Like, the Catholic churches tend to be bigger and a little more ornate. And I mean, of course, the Catholic Church is, over 2,000 years old, and they have a pretty big organization. And then you have, just smaller, humbler churches that, I think are reflective of sort of what they believe. They're less, ornate in their belief. They're Latter-day Saints, for instance, or Seventh-day Adventists or Jehovah's Witnesses. Their buildings are very spare. I mean, and that's part of what they believe too. They're not much for, the symbols and the statues and these sorts of things. So yeah, all of some of those differences in belief are reflected in the appearance of their structures inside and out. But at other times it's interesting the sort of arbitrary elements that they use. They might have used whatever building happened to be available, and so you can see remnants of the fact that Church of Christ was an old schoolhouse and the Seventh-day Adventist was an old dentist's office. So I found that really interesting too, sort of the repurposing of these structures.
You mentioned pretty much as we started this off about the old piece of equipment you're using for a camera. Like, what I gather is you have a respect for the old school mentality almost. You're talking to a guy who still makes mixtapes. Mm-hmm. I have a cassette deck in my car.
Good.
I just love all that old shit. And mm-hmm. I'm guessing that does tend to relate to you on a similar note, because almost like the way things are done these days, not done like they used to. People maybe tend to have gotten lazy or something. But like you said, with your old camera, you gotta sit back and really go through all the old motions. And recording a mixtape isn't like recording a CD. You gotta sit there and you gotta listen to the entire song. And
right.
Has something like that come into play, like with all your pieces of work, or is?
Yeah. All of my work for almost all of my career has been with a large camera like that. In high school, I used like smaller cameras, and today for vacation with my girlfriend or something, I take a little digital camera just to take like snapshots or whatever. But for my real work, I've always used the big camera just because I do find that it focuses me in on the things that I'm looking at, and it makes you slow down and take time to look. I mean, it is a very slow process. Like, you just set up the tripod, then put the camera onto it. You have to then focus and get the shot right. And the film I shoot is big sort of sheets of film, 8 by 10 inches, and I usually carry around film holders, which are independent from the camera, unlike a 35 millimeter camera where the film is rolled up inside. Here the film's in these little boxes to keep it safe from the light until you are ready to expose it. Usually I only shoot about 8 sheets in a day. So if you only have 8 shots in a day, it forces you to really make choices and decide what you're going to focus on and what you're going to think is important. Just personally, I really appreciate that process of making you slow down and look. Like, there are a lot of really great digital photographers out there, but their process is in a lot of ways sort of fundamentally different. For them, it's because there's no constraint to the volume. You can just shoot and shoot and shoot endlessly, thousands and thousands of pictures, and then it's a question of,
you're bound to have a few good ones in there.
And then it's the question of editing it down to the ones that are good. So, and I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, people arrive at really great work that way, but it's just not really for me. Like, I really like the slow process because I find that it connects me just through my own eyes to the environment that I'm in. And that's something that I really appreciate. Like, I feel if you move through a space so fast, just sort of using the camera to like document it faster than you can see, you may end up with really great photography in the end, but you don't really form your own personal connection to it. And that's kind of like the half of what I do that's sort of just for me, that, makes me feel like I've lived my life rather than just sort of been living solely through a camera.
You could take a picture and it could be a piece of art, but it doesn't necessarily make it an Andrew Zimmermann piece of art.
That's right, yeah. It is definitely a part of my personal style, and there's less and less people these days who use the old techniques. Even 35mm roll film, not very many people use that anymore, and large format film, like I use, they're very few, and almost all the ones I know are substantially older than me. So by the time I'm 50, 20 years from now, God only knows how many of us will be left. I might be one of the only ones, but I intend to be one of the only ones. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a stubborn person, and I'm hoping to stick it out and just see where it leads me.
You and me both, man. How long exactly have you been doing what you do?
Let's see. Year is it? 2012. 14 years.
Really?
Yeah. Actually, I mean, I started what I would consider making serious work, like, very shortly after I began using a large format camera. Like, it really just clicked with me very, very quickly. This was right after I went off to college. I took a class in large format photography, which I hated because the teacher was horrible. I mean, he and I didn't get along at all. But I realized really quickly that it was a subject that I enjoyed intensely. Also, that I just, for whatever reason, seemed to be very good at. Before that, I'd actually sort of been a writer. I mean, I'd gone off to college thinking, I'm gonna be a writer. But very quickly, I realized, no, I'm a lot better at this other thing. So I started, making lots of work. I started showing here and there, and I still have pieces from those days that I'm proud of. It's 14 years ago now. So I've been doing it for quite a while.
You plan to do it for the rest of your life, I imagine.
I hope so, yeah.